In this video, we're going to be talking about how you can practice self-compassion. Why self-compassion? Because self-compassion can enhance your level of optimism. And why are we interested in that? Is because, as I mentioned in previous videos, your optimism can influence your positive health outcomes. That's through improving your mental health, and it's believed that it could also achieve that through the ability of promoting your immune system as well. Okay, so this is why we're interested in this topic. So my name is Dr. Mikhail Rashik of Neurogenomics. Before we get going, we should probably define what self-compassion is, and basically that is when you choose to treat yourself with kindness and care when encountering challenging or difficult situations, okay? As opposed to being self-critical. Now, self-compassion, it's a psychological concept. So that means there's theories as to what defines self-compassion, and one of the theories based on the paper that I'm going to be reviewing in today's video defines self-compassion as made up of 3 components, and that includes self-kindness as opposed to self-criticism, sense of common humanity as opposed to isolation, and finally mindfulness as opposed to a concept that the person who created this theory calls over-identification. So maybe let's define these terms. I know self-kindness might be obvious. That's basically when you treat the situation you encounter, difficult situation you encounter with understanding and care, even if it means you just made a mistake. Now, what is common sense of humanity? That's understanding that we humans, all of us, we make mistake, all of us, we fail, all of us, we suffer at some point in our lifetime. And we're all united through these experiences. So they never belong just to you and individually to you if you ever encounter such experiences. All right, so we are united commonly through such experiences. Now, the contrast to that, as I mentioned, is what this particular author referred to as over-identification, and I hope I'm getting this term correctly. And basically what that meant is where you exaggerate a narrative about your situation to a point where it could be destructive because you might not cope with the situation properly. So there's that. And why self-compassion? As I already mentioned, it improves optimism, but it also is known to increase your sense of resilience when dealing with challenging situations. And recall that in a first video that I introduced how you can actually practice enhancing your sense of optimism, I introduced the concept of best personal self, and it was based on meta-analysis. So it's a study that looked into many different techniques on how you can train your optimism. And the cool thing is that this study obviously provides a table with the factor impact, so how impactful a given technique was, and the self-compassion is one of the strongest impacts. Don't mind my weird movements. I'm crossing creeks here, and I wanted to introduce that because we are trying to basically train our optimism so that we can gain those great health benefits that your optimistic nature can provide you with. So this is why we're now going to be talking about this one, and we are going to discuss one of the papers that was introduced in that meta-analysis. And this particular set of authors, what they were doing is they were looking at college students, female college students, and they introduced a program that was 3 weeks long, but in reality 2 weeks long, because in the third week they just got together to assess the results. And now I'm going to introduce to you how this works and what they did. And in essence, I invite you to try this, but if you had a challenge with the Best Personal Self program, which is much simple, the 2-week program of exercise, of doing specific exercises, might be challenging, but I challenge you to try. I will definitely give it a try. And this is what it looked like, and I'm paraphrasing obviously to some degree. So in the first week, these young ladies got together and they had group exercises. So first they had to write down how they normally react. In what way do they normally react to challenging, critical situations? And that was one thing they had to do. They also had to write down how are they self-critical, in what way they're self-critical when they are self-critical. So like, what do they do when they criticize themselves? And finally, the last exercise they had to do in that group setting was determine what would need to be satisfied in order for them to be able to cope with the situation properly in a self-compassionate manner. So what criteria have to be met in order for them to be able to deal with a difficult situation with a sense of kindness and so on, as I mentioned, in terms of what defines self-compassion. All right, so that was that. And then they had a homework. They had a homework exercise. And in that homework exercise, I wonder if we can see the glacier where we're heading towards, maybe right there in the distance. And the homework was as follows. This is so interesting. And I mean, listen, this is a proper scientific paper where they analyzed the results and so on, and they did variety of different assessments to determine what worked and what did not. And so here's the homework. So one thing is each of the participants got a bracelet, something like this. So you see I have a bracelet on my arm, and every time that any time someone was being self-critical, or they caught themselves being self-critical, they had to switch the bracelet from one hand to another. Kind of interesting, right? And kind of unusual, I suppose. If you wonder why, I was wondering why. I didn't think the paper explained that. I think it's probably to identify how frequently you might actually be self-critical to yourself, because sometimes you might not even realize how often that happens. So that was one exercise. The other one they had to do is they had to keep a journal. So they had to keep a journal writing down how to resolve the difficult situations they encountered in that week in a self-compassionate manner. And last exercise they had to do was practice a form of Buddhist meditation that is related to practicing mindful, self-loving kindness. So I wonder if we can try to show you the glacier. All right, so then they got together in a second week, and of course, apart from discussing how they experienced the previous week homework, they had other group exercises again. And the group exercises this time were they had to write down what would motivate them to be more self-compassionate. So what would that take? So that was one exercise. The other exercise, they had to write those compassionate phrases that related to the 3 specific concepts of what defines self-compassion. So we're talking about that self-kindness, mindfulness, and the common sense of humanity. So like an example is common sense of humanity would be, I suffer in a way like all other humans experience suffering, right? Something like that, right? A phrase for self-kindness would be, may I be free of suffering, and so on. And they had to write a bunch of these related to potentially different situations. And the last group exercise that they had to do is the participants had to write down I wish I could walk backwards so you could see this. They had to write down 5 things that they find good about themselves, that they find attractive about themselves, as obviously as human beings. So what are the good positive aspects of themselves? And then they had a homework again for next week, and that homework was they had to practice using those phrases, those self-compassion phrases that they made up during the group session, during the week, every time they encountered difficult situations, so they could practice self-compassion. So that was one thing. The second one thing that they had to do, I found it so interesting, is they had to write a letter to themselves from a point of view of a third person who's writing about them from the most compassionate, loving, kindness point of view about them and a situation they've encountered in life that was particularly challenging or difficult for them. So that was another homework they had to do, and they had to continue practicing their meditation and repeating those phrases before bed like they did in the previous week. And that's it. So that was it. Well, I mean, it's a lot of work, I suppose. So again, I challenge you to try if you want to improve your optimism. And what was the outcome of this study? And basically what happened is, not surprisingly, participants of this group definitely showed an increased level of self-compassion, despite the fact that this was only a 2-week-long training. And there were many positive mental health outcomes. So not surprisingly, they also show increased level of optimism. The reason why I say not surprising, because that's why we're doing this video, right? And then, but they also increase level of life satisfaction and many other attributes. Of course, there was a control group, and control group did something completely different, and they didn't see as many positive mental health outcomes, but they did also show increase in life satisfaction and optimism, but not to the same significant effect. So I might talk about that in another video, perhaps, because after all, the goal here is to try to demonstrate as many different ways how we can improve our optimism. But the ladies who did the self-compassion training, they also showed another really interesting result, and that was reduction in rumination. So, which basically is where you dwell over and over something negative that happened in your life. And the reason why that's potentially dangerous is because that can predispose an individual towards development of depression. So it was great to see these individuals also demonstrate obvious reduction in this kind of behavior as well. So really neat stuff. I definitely would welcome your comments if you do practice this, even if you do any part of these, and let me know if you see any positive impacts for yourself. I do want to remind you, we do have a COVID Q&A event coming up. I'll let you go into other videos to find out the details and how you can get free tickets to that. We also have another event for business owners who would be interested in providing a program for their employees which promotes a well-being. And this program I set up with 2 other experts as well, financial expert and mental health expert. And this basically, we target well-being from the variety of these different angles. And the goal here is to, of course, improve well-being of employees. We believe it also means improved productivity, improved and enhanced desire to work when we're coming out of this toxic environment of the pandemic. Want to remind you as well, we have an ongoing survey as well where you can tell us your interest in epigenetic testing that looks at your biological aging. And the reason why is because biological aging is different from your chronological aging, and it's malleable. You can change it, and optimism is one of the ways how you can potentially change that. So check it out. We're onboarding that. We plan to onboard that test as well. And then hopefully the creek is not making too much noise. If it is, my apologies. Thank you for checking out the video, and give us a like if you like this content. Subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who you believe might benefit from training themselves in terms of improving their sense of optimism. And again, I just remind you that study upon study upon study shows that it enhanced optimism, which you can indeed train, does improve your health outcomes. And you could potentially measure that with that biological aging genetic test that I was just talking about. And leave a comment, as I mentioned, and I definitely look forward to seeing you in another video. Bye everyone.